Hey legal team, welcome once again to Fitz in Law School. I'm Fitz, and today we're going to be talking about something just as politically and legally relevant as usual. The last video that I had tried to upload was completely destroyed in its entirety.
No, God!
So what are you gonna do? But the point is, though, is that today we're going to be talking about the Trump administration and the executive branch deciding to send troops into Portland and apparently into several other cities and states. So I don't really want to get into the politics of this. It's the Trump administration. What are you going to do? But then what I do want to talk about is I want to talk about the debate that's been going on about whether or not this is legal and constitutional. So let's first start talking about the Constitution. The Constitution is the founding document of our, democratic republic. And essentially it is a 7-article document that was ratified in 1789. And what it is it's basically laying out how the different branches interact with each other, what they do, and then how they interact with each other. And the most basic tenet of that Constitution was designed to prevent tyranny, or in other words, prevent any one section of the government becoming too powerful so that they could become tyrannical. Essentially something that we had just tried to get rid of, a king. And now we're setting up a new government, and so the only thing the framers were really concerned about was, number one, making everything and everyone answerable to the voters. And number two, preventing tyranny, setting up systems so that they would actually fight against the ability for a government to become tyrannical. And that's why the most basic thing of, they were all actually very skeptical about a single executive, and they actually had proposed a kind of a council, an executive council, or a group of people as opposed to one person. And it was actually only because George Washington was such an exceptional human being that they said, you know what, a single person could probably do it, because he's, only people of that caliber will become the president of the United States. So I said I didn't want to get into the politics, but so that's kind of interesting to start out with, is that the whole basis of the Constitution is to separate the powers from each other. And so what this is the federal government has a wide array of powers that have been allowed or created by the government and interpreting the Constitution. And so although the Constitution was a big thing about how the government is set up, the amendments to the Constitution are essentially just a big list of what not to do. They're a big list of what the federal government can and can't do. Or no, they're essentially just what they can't do. And Article 10 is kind of another one of those you can't do that kind of things. So Article 10 is the foundation of something called the police power of the United States. And the police power is essentially this idea of the style of laws and the style in which you can impress your power upon people when it comes to certain intimate acts, intimate parts of your life. That's kind of reserved for the state. And so, like the 10th Amendment says, and I quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." And so things like, whenever you go and you get married, that's kind of an intimate part of your life. You don't get a marriage certificate through the federal government. You get it through the state. Same when you're getting a driver's license or applying for a loan or something like that. Usually it's kind of through the state or through, a bank, I guess, when it comes to a loan. But usually you're dealing mostly with the state and usually not really with the federal government. And that was designed by the founders to make the people closer to the government that's the one that are policing them, which will then make the government more answerable to the people. It's a very clever system, and it works, rather well. We've survived 250 years of this kind of dynamic, so it's pretty good. However, now we get into current events. So the acting head of the Department of Homeland Security, which was a fairly recently developed department, I think that it was through the Patriot Act after September 11th, but he said on Fox News, "I don't need invitations by the state mayors, or state governors to do our job." we're going to do that, whether they like us there or not. Interesting. So what that kind of implies is, in that statement, he says, no, we don't need the invitation to do our job. So what he's saying is that his job as part of the executive branch and the Department of Homeland Security is to do what they are doing right now. What they're doing right now is they're having unlabeled, unmarked soldiers, essentially, people with large guns and camo, walking through Portland and seemingly trying to walk through other cities and disperse riots, snatch people up in rental vans and, do something with them or to them or just scare people. Like this it seems like this is the kind of basis on which they say this is our job to do that. And so let's examine what their impetus is of being there. So 40 U.S. Code Section 1315 of the Department of Homeland Security was passed a while ago, but essentially it was tacked on to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. And what that law says is, quote, the Department of Homeland Security, quote, shall protect the buildings, grounds, and property that are owned, occupied, or secured by the federal government, end quote. So what that kind of means and implies is, just pay attention to the wording here, because this is how these laws work and are interpreted. Protect the buildings, grounds, and property that are owned, occupied, or secured by the federal government. So that's a very tangible connection. That is something that is not if the federal government has an interest in it. No. It's if the federal government owns, occupies, or secures that sort of building. And there's almost nothing except for federal property that are owned, occupied, or secured by the federal government. So I suppose there is wiggle room there saying like, oh, the entire United States is secured by the federal government, therefore we can send troops wherever we want. But that seems like a interesting and egregious abuse of power. But the federal government sending troops into states and cities to quell unrest is nothing new. It's not controversial. In 1877 to quell the Great Railroad Strike, Chicago in 1894 for the Pullman Strike, Little Rock for desegregation in 1957, Chicago, Detroit, Washington, Baltimore, many cities for the 40s and 60s after all the race riots that we've had. Federal troops and the National Guard go into these sort of cities and these towns all the time. But what's so weird about this one? Well, what is essentially two things. The first thing is what forces are involved. In other words, how is the Trump administration exercising these rights throughout the United States and these cities? And second is why he's claiming he's doing it. It's very similar to the wall. He declared a national emergency, and that was when border crossings were down and all these kinds of things were down. And so what was kind of an odd justification there was how he did it and why he did it. And so this exact same thing is kind of the exact same way is the forces that are involved. Almost every single time I've ever looked up any of these disasters, it's been the National Guard. So the National Guard is this kind of combination between the federal government and the state, and they're kind of under control. But that's the reason why the federal government has almost always called out the National Guard, because there are 54 separate National Guard units. It's, the states and the territories, and each one of them has their own National Guard. And so it's essentially the federal government ordering out their own police the state's own police in order to kind of secure it. So it's most likely what it is it's like the state has them under control, but they get paid by the federal government. And so it's kind of like this joint thing. But that's used to police these riots and kind of secure these locations. This time, the Trump administration is using a combination of the Department of Homeland Security. That's the problem. We don't know where these people are coming from. It seems like Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Customs and Border Control, and then also some National Guard, but we're not quite sure. So that's kind of a problem. And the other problem is that, why the president is claiming to use these forces, why he's choosing this. So it seems like this kind of mishmash of federal troops are doing is that they are not protecting and securing the property that is owned or secured by the federal government. What they're doing is they're going throughout the cities and essentially locking the cities down, which is something that they just don't normally do. And so it's those two combinations that make this such a kind of an odd situation. The main reason why we don't want this kind of a thing to happen is kind of for three reasons. The first reason is because it makes people accountable to their accusers. Essentially, if someone is abusing the law and claims to be enforcing the law, then they should be able to essentially justify their positions, there's a reason why all cops have a badge number and their name displayed. It's to make sure that various pieces of the government aren't tyrannical. It's to prevent tyranny, to make sure they're accountable in some sort of way. And then lastly, it's pretty simple. It's to prevent people from impersonating these people. That seems to be something that's kind of concerned, is that with this, and this is the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI saying about how extremism, and especially something like the KKK or kind of far-right extremism, has been identified by the federal government as a national threat, as a threat to national security. And that was done years ago. And so kind of giving people the ability to impersonate soldiers is just something that's not quite setting it up for success here. So all in all, is this constitutional? I don't think so. But the main problem now is, a law is composed of two parts. One is the law. The second part is someone willing to enforce that law. And if no one's willing to enforce it, then was there a law in the first place? But yeah, so that is just kind of a brief overview of what's going on in regards to this topic. I hope it was interesting. I hope it helped. Let me know if you have any questions. Other than that, hope everyone has a great day. Wash your hands, and I'll see you next time.